Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 26th public lecture hosted by NUS Cities. Before we start the event, please ensure your devices are on silent mode or powered off. For those who don't know about NUS Cities, we are a university-wide, multidisciplinary, open and inclusive collaborative platform hosted within the College of Design and Engineering. Through our collaborations with local and international institutions, we hope to create synergies that extended within and as well as beyond NUS. The NUS Cities Public Lecture Series will investigate policies, ideas, and projects developed by urban experts which aspire to create sustainable, resilient, and livable cities. Through the lecture series, we hope to create a platform for discussion, retrospection, and conversation to give momentum to the ongoing research and exploration regarding issues concerning cities. I would now like to introduce our speaker of the evening, Prof. Marie Harder. Is a distinguished professor at Fudan University in China and at the University of Brighton in the UK. Her team has developed the WeValue InSitu Approach, which helps civil expert community or residential groups crystallize their existing but dually tested shared values. Her research interests are in the crystallization of shared values of local people for use in urban planning, resilience, international development, ESG, EIA, social impact. For cities, her team has used this approach to map the living preferences of different groups and build profiles of cultural shared values. These have been combined with focus group insights to create conceptual frameworks on various urban topics. For example, climate change in Vienna and Shanghai and infrastructure investment in 3 UK settlements. Please join me in welcoming her on stage.
Reduce that. Let's see if we can get the volume right. No, it was too loud. Okay, that's fine. Can you lower the lights, do you think? Is it possible to reduce the lights? Thanks. Thank you. Wonderful. Let's set the mood a little bit with some lights. Good evening, everybody. I'm really very honored to be here. I've joined NUS Cities for some very exciting field work on a project for the last 2-3 weeks. And it's really such a joy to work with the students and the staff here. It's a very special opportunity for me, and I feel very privileged to be here. I'm going to take you on a little journey tonight in this talk. So bear with me. I'll try and give you a bit of fun, but I hope you can work up some really good, serious questions for me by the end. So the title is Our Hearts, Our City, and it's about how we can crystallize shared values and use this to inform policy, different policies. And as it says, I'm based most of the time at Fudan University in Shanghai. I've been there 14 years. But I still am part-time a little bit of the year in Brighton, which is where I've been working most of my life. So I'm very new to Singapore. I've only been in the field 2 weeks, so please bear with me if I say something a little bit ignorant or make some wrong assumptions. You can feel free to correct me anytime, but I apologize if I give any misunderstanding. First of all, you should know everything in my team is a team effort. In this day, is era of highly competitive academic survival of the fittest, my team actually has to rely on each other. This is quite tough for them in their CVs to be third author or fifth author on a paper, but that's the way we do things. And so that means every single slide here has been contributed to by most of my team. So here's the outline. I'm going to have a tiny introduction. Most of it's in the middle. It's about shared values crystallization, trying to explain how it's very useful for informing policy design, for policy implementation. So that's where most of the talk is. But I have 2 other little sections. I will be very quick, talking about how this is a new science behind this approach and why this is rare in traditional universities. So first part, what are we doing here? What is a public talk anyway? Well, in this case, it's an interaction between academic and the public. What's the big deal? Well, I think I should tell you more about what an academic is. We know there's the public here. Well, what's an academic? Well, an academic is considered to be somebody who's decided to sit themselves within a system of knowledge. And this system of knowledge has been formed over decades, sometimes hundreds of years, by a group that has decided to follow the rules and ideas and concepts within one discipline. So they have a foundation which is well established of knowledge, and they start with foundational ideas and build on them and constantly go back and check on those. And they're kind of vertical. So they start on some kind of foundations and build upwards. And over time, another subject may develop, and they have their own foundations. And they're not necessarily cross-linked, not nowadays. Maybe hundreds of years ago they were, and some of the great thinkers could cover lots of different subjects. But nowadays we have tend to have different ways of thinking, different ways of approaching problems, except for maybe the natural sciences, which tend to have some specialized knowledge, but it's all pretty rational and to do with measuring things directly and building on that with mathematics and very objective things. So that's what you need to know about an academic, is they normally live in a boundary. And that's how universities are set up. And that's how funding systems for universities are set up. And that's how career progression is set up. You stay in your boundary and you progress vertically. Multidisciplinary science is when different people from different disciplines come together and try to look at a problem together. Well, kind of together, because in multidisciplinary means you kind of stay in your box, but you let somebody else also look at the problem with you, and hopefully you discuss it a bit and try to work together towards a solution. So you might have a question in cities. It might be, how should we plan the roads? Or it might be, how should we plan for the elderly? And you might get people from, say, architecture and engineering looking at it at the same time. And this is kind of the way academia works, generally speaking. So the next thing that you would see is some pink lines and some yellow. And the yellow represents the public. And the question then would be, how do academics interact with the public? And the answer is with some care. I just have a look. Yeah, there it goes. It's here now. Okay. So participatory science or participatory approaches would be when here's the academics in their little boxes, and they're trying to participate, have some participation by society or by non-academics. And the interesting thing is, you see, that they don't actually go into the domain. So academics don't necessarily go into public space. You see that before they can accept knowledge into an academic knowledge, they can only accept that knowledge if it goes through certain methodologies or certain ways of data collection. So a psychologist can't turn up for work the next day and say, oh, everybody, we got to have a team meeting. I found out some amazing information when I talked to Uncle Tim at dinner last night. He told me he has psychotic hallucinations when he does certain things, and then write a paper on it. You cannot. You have only accept information into the academic area through certain methodologies and rigorous things, which are decided by the academic area. So when academics tend to talk with or interact with non-academics, they do it in certain ways, and tonight is a public talk. So I'm talking to you, and as you know, a typical way for academics to get information back would be to go out and do questionnaires, surveys. It's very straightforward. I decide the questionnaire and survey, and I give it to you, and you fill it in, and I take it back. And then now it's in a form that I'm allowed to take in. I'm saying all of this with tongue in cheek, right? Because it's true, it's really true, but I don't tend to respect it very much. But other people really do. Okay. So that's why we're here. Now, what is the problem, and why do I think we need a shared values approach? Well, let's have a look at an example. Let's look at recycling policies, which I know a little bit about. What kind of policies do cities use to try to get people to recycle? Well, typically they might say, hey guys, there's not enough material. We've got to recycle it or there won't be enough. It's just logical. Please recycle. Does it work? No. So the economists might be advising the city planners, and they say, use incentives, give them a green point. Every month, after 30 green points, they can get a bar of soap. This will work. And if they don't, we'll find them. It's economics. It's basic economics, absolutely will work. Does it work? No, not in my experience. Or we could go for psychology. Psychologists say, I know the way. Everybody has deep within them an environmental identity. It's one of the 4 core identities in our framework of knowledge. Therefore, we just need to enhance this and remind people how much they love the environment and keep doing everything to emotionally connect them to trees, and then they'll recycle. Is it true? Does it work? Not to my knowledge. Education, yes, we just keep educating the children, get them from a young age. 20 years later, they'll be great recyclers. Does it work? No. Environmental Education is a journal that specializes in this, and they recently, a couple of years ago, had a big conference to ask, why is everything we did for 20 years not working? And I would suggest that the reason is that these approaches, this knowledge that's being used, the knowledge systems, don't align very well with lived reality. Let's look at lived reality. Somebody comes down from the apartments early in the morning, 7:30, they've got to get to work, they're in competition with somebody else for promotion, they've got their best suit on. Are they going to stop and recycle? No, they're too busy. Okay, that's their lived reality. Oh, we got an enthusiastic environmentalist. Sure, they're totally interested in the environment. Absolutely want to do everything for the environment, but they once, 3 years ago, saw a worker take the recycling and empty it into the other garbage truck. So they think you aren't really doing the recycling. You're mixing it. Do you think I'm going to contribute to this hypocrisy? No way. So they won't recycle. Okay? It's their lived reality. Or let's just talk about basic values, action gaps of humans. Humans are humans. Like, do you know how many people want to be good people, noble people? They know all the rules of life that they should abide by. Be kind to other people. Don't hurt people. Can they do it? No, it's not that easy. Humans aren't made to do that. So there is something very well studied by lots of different academic types called the values action gap, and it's normal. So for all these reasons, there's no city in the world that I know of, no city, maybe some small neighborhoods, that have successful, for example, food waste recycling. Not. Why? Why can we not overcome this? Because maybe the academics that the poor town planners are relying on are working in silos. They're working in silos, academic silos. And if you're going to get any improvement at all, it's not going to be this way. You need a totally different type of science to get there. So that was an example why I think we need a shared values approach, because a shared values approach is about first understanding these lived realities, first understand the people, then look at the problem. And you see, the problem is we don't have a place for shared reality here. There is currently not an existing system that allows you to do that in normal, traditional academic work. But there is this gap between academic knowledge and other knowledge types. In this case, we're talking about societal knowledge. There's also gaps in other ways between academics and policymakers, or indigenous people and other people nearby. There are a lot of places where there are knowledge gaps. And I would argue that because they are different knowledge types. And what's really missing is the acknowledgement that we need to have an actual step of translation, or an actual process of translation, or we could call it conversion if you like. And that's what I'm going to show you about the approach that we've developed. So we propose, well, the problems are that some of the top-down inquiries, sorry about that. Some of the top-down inquiries currently used, like interviews, tend to limit themselves to their own ways of thinking. So if I'm a psychologist, I'll come to you and ask you, according to my framework, do you think trustworthiness is more important than honesty? And it's like, what? What are you talking about? It's like, well, just fill in the questionnaire. Don't worry if you don't understand it. I know you don't understand it. Just fill it in. It's like, yeah, okay. So they're limiting themselves to their own ways of thinking. They tend to be rigid, and they're not even necessarily possible to capture new ideas that are outside their discipline. You could do that with anthropology, but anthropological studies tend to take long periods, generally 6 months, 2 years. And that's a lot of time to pay an expert to get to know only one community. And even when you do that, the anthropologist has filled in 3 chapters. And how does he summarize it to give it to somebody so they can actually do something with it? It's very difficult to make it explicit. We propose a method which overcomes some of these problems. Number one, we don't try to simplify the psychology concepts to the people. We don't even start with outsider concepts. We start with the idea, why don't we, instead of making this simpler from the academics, what if we could help society or a place where other type of knowledge exists? What if we could find a way for them to make their own existing knowledge closer to us, a little bit more explicit? And so we start with this idea of making local knowledge more accessible to us. We're the outsiders. We're the outsiders. Let's not start with us. Let's start with them. And we start with the idea that you must have some kind of translation or crystallization process. So now we go to the main bit, the basic, what we call the WeValue InSitu. We call it InSitu because it's about crystallizing something that's already there. It's called WeValue because it's about what the group values. And for reasons I won't explain very much now, it has to start with a group. We start with a group that has something in common. It can be anything, but it's usually, it works most strongly when the group has some kind of practice in common. So it's a community of practice, which is normally self-forming. It can also be on the internet, doesn't have to be in person, but it's a group that has talked or has knowledge of doing in common. We take them through a process, which can take anything from an hour to 4 hours, usually depending on the size. So if it's only a few people, it can be an hour. By the time we finish this special process, this group will have articulated, disentangled, and made much better defined their own shared values. I'll tell you more how in a moment. The actual output that we walk away from that afternoon is statements, very precise, relatively precise statements, concise statements about what's important to them. So it can be, what's important to us is that we always speak kindly to each other. What's important to us is that our children don't forget about us. What's important to us is that we develop higher and higher levels of thinking, mental stimulation. So they have these statements and they arrange them at the end in a format, a framework, which is completely bespoke. So these statements are theirs, they create them. They're completely bespoke. They're unique. And the way they assemble them is completely unique. And just to make sure that we've got it right, that we've understood them, and that we can present this to other people, we ask the group to provide us with a narrative. So they stand there and they say, okay, well, at the bottom is our fundamental something or other. This is how we do it on the way. These are the kind of things we keep checking, and kind of here's where we're going. And they tell you what it means. So that's the narrative. And the two together make the immediate output. So how do we get it? What are we doing different? Why is this not just as good as the same as an interview or a survey? Well, I can tell you that it's kind of a workshop activity. I don't want you to think too lightly of it. It's not just any workshop activity, and you'll know that by the end, but maybe not right away. We start by helping them tell us who they are in the room. We don't trigger. We ask them to explain something about themselves, and they are allowed to use photos as a prop. That gets them down into talking about experiences and tacit things that they do in the tacit zone. And then there's a trigger list, which triggers them to think of things they hadn't thought of before, and they discuss it amongst themselves. We don't put content in. It's not even that we have a framework. We don't even bring content in. We don't tell them in the middle of it, oh yes, I have a dog that did exactly that same thing last Tuesday. No, we don't say anything like that. We only reflect them to each other. And then they construct their statements one at a time, and then they build them. So another way of thinking about this is that we're going, in this here we have explicit. All you need to know is up here is explicit, means I can precisely say something. Down here is that kind of feely, fluffy, not quite sure what's going on thing. It's a bit like if someone asks you, what's it feel like to ride a bike? And you go, oh, it feels pretty cool. It's like, yeah, but exactly how does it feel to ride a bike? What is the best thing that you like about riding a bike? And you go, something like this. And you don't know how to say it. And luckily, if there's someone in the room that also likes riding bikes, you can start making meaning. It's called meaning making, sense making. It's something you know about in design. Those of you that are designers, it's something that's used in business studies. You have sense making and meaning making, and you're actually constructing the concept by bouncing ideas off each other. And first we tend to get them down to talk about it. And this is just an extension of the same diagram. Sorry, I didn't have enough room. It's the same diagram continuing to change. They identify roughly what's important to them in the blue. Then somebody else comes in and says, well, it's not really the wind in your hair. It's kind of the thrill of knowing you might fall off and break your teeth. I like that part. And someone else will say, no, I think it's more like this. And then they'll decide which bit is important. And then the facilitator will say, okay, so how could we express that? How would you express that? Let's start talking about words. And even as they talk about the words, they're making sense, they're making meaning. They have to work through it. So what you actually end up with at the end is these shared values elicited represent a natural envelope, an envelope of what's the most important to those members of the group. And I didn't go in and say, right, let's start this discussion and talk about money. And then next we're going to talk about childcare. I don't set the tone. What naturally comes to the surface is the things that are important to them in the order that's important to them. They decide where these things sit relative to each other, and they tell you what they are. And all along the way, they've learned to do meaning making and to do articulation, which they might not have done before. By the way, all the way through, and you can have the slides later, I have references of papers we've published. So we have papers published on every aspect of these things so far. So this is what it could look like. This is an example from Young Mothers in East Lombok, which is an island in Indonesia. It's a very poor area, very, very poor area that we were working in. We were looking, actually, we were there as part of a team looking at child stunting. And the thing is, it's not really known why children are stunted. They don't grow properly. It's not really known. It's not just nutrition, absolutely not just nutrition. So, you've got 16 different types of health science interested in it, and none of them were looking at what's going on in the home. So that was our job, was to try to bridge this lack of knowledge. And what I want to do, I don't mean to take a lot of your time. Academics usually like to do everything quick, and give me a graph. But you need to read it to get the feel for, number one, how special this kind of data is, and number two, how much it can tell you if you're listening and if you're ready to take this in its raw form back to your question about child stunting and see how it might relate. So here's what the mother said. The foundation for us is that a mother should be able to sacrifice her life for her kids, and the mother would like to have a kid who's useful for her society. Happiness is the most important to kids, and the ability to survive is the heart of everything, because we need to struggle. We will in life struggle. So the mothers need to support the kids. And then every statement starts with the words, it is important to us. It is important to us that a mother makes sacrifices for her child. It's important to us that we value our children and we do not neglect them. The kids' happiness comes from good living conditions, education, and the home. So it's important to us that we respect elderly people. It's important to us that the children know the Arabic letters so that they can read the Quran. For the family side, whatever happens, we need to be able to be united as a whole family. We need to have a sense of forgiveness for the sake of the children. For compassion showing by the parents, they need to get close emotionally, especially between mother and kids. So it's important for us that we protect ourselves in difficult or disastrous circumstances for the family's sake. It's important to us that we need to interact respectfully with each other, older and younger, and be mindful of tone of speech. We have a responsibility to keep them healthy and to give them proper study and play so that in the end, they can give some benefits to others. So therefore, it's important to us that school is regarded as a foundation for the future development of religion, homeland, and nation. And it's important that mothers maintain the child's health by cooking vegetables that they can afford. We need to be able to introduce collaborative work to the kids so they can later have a good environment, wider social environment. When we may not be able to fight for them on our own, then the society should help the kids. So they want them to be sociable so that society will help them. It's important to us that the family is highly valued because it is the source of encouragement and motivation in life. It's important that we go on holiday so our children are refreshed. A holiday meant a one-afternoon picnic. It's important to us that mutual cooperation is considered a foundation for neighbors and society. And it's important to us that mothers provide the best life experience we can for the children. At the very end, we can give good care to our children by doing this. Okay, so these are semi-literate, extremely poor, hand-to-mouth people, women who have only enough money that evening for one day's food. And they can achieve this communication to you about what's important in their life in an hour and a half. So it's kind of called a rapid ethnography type method. And we also always have local researchers. We'll do all checking of the translations, all checking that the final format is what they believe is authentic. You can go back 6 months later and the groups generally will say, this represents us. This is something that I'm happy to show other mothers in another country, and they will understand us. Now, you may say, I don't get it. What's this got to do with stunting? But actually, there's a lot. And we do have a part 2, which is we have a focus group afterwards, which I'll show you in a moment, can give you more information. But the first part, we don't bias them by saying, hey, I'm here to talk about stunting. What do you feed your kids? No. Step 1 is, what's important in your life? Step 2 is, take me through the day, and I'm going to think about what your kids and your kids' food is during that discussion. But we already have a lot of information. The children are the boys, especially, they're encouraged to play football because collaboration is important. They're sent early to the local neighborhood school where they can just learn Arabic letters. They are expected from the beginning to be resilient and knowing that they're going to have really serious challenges, tsunamis, volcanoes, being pushed to another village, all sorts of things are going to happen and they're expecting it. So we have all sorts of interesting things which tell you something about where the child's likely to eat. They might eat in the neighbor's house, that the mother is aware of cooking vegetables, but she may not be able to afford them. There's not a lot here about how important money is to us or being able to buy everything I need for my kids. It's not coming out as a major thing. So it's a lot, you learn a lot, and you do 20 of these and you get a saturation of concepts and you feel pretty confident that you've learned a lot. When we make it look formal, we formalize it, we put it into standard library format. So we're building up quite a library, maybe, I don't know, 100 of these now from around the world. And this is a kind of a representation of this group. And these things can start to become kind of proto-indicators. So if there's an intervention project comes to this area, we can actually evaluate that intervention project because we can say, okay, you think you want to come and give the children an egg a day or improve their height by a certain amount or whatever. That's what you want. You're the outsiders. Can we check, please, whether whatever you're going to do is going to give the children the chance to learn more Arabic letters? Yes or no? Scale of 1 to 5, how did you do on that? Or what are you doing in terms of helping the children learn how to collaborate? Are you helping that? Because this is what the community wants. So let's evaluate you outsiders with these indicators. And it doesn't matter if they're not indicators that you would come up with in your psychological framework or your economics framework. These are the indicators that count to these people. So I just want to give you a couple of examples of other self-portraits, and then we'll move on to all the things you can do with them. So we've used this approach in the field, all of different, I don't know, about 10 countries, maybe 12 years, 7 languages. This is an example. This is a totally different example. Okay, this is some planning officers actually in North Norfolk in the United Kingdom, right? And so they're talking about themselves, but you can see it's still about their entire life is still overlapping with their work and themselves as a group. So it's important to think about the top first. So the top is 11. It's important to us that we're making our town the best it can be for residents, businesses, and visitors. And then look at this. It's important to us that we reflect the diversity of views of our community. So diversity of views is something really deep in them. It's important to us that we're on a journey towards developing our commitment. So a caveat on a caveat to care for the natural environment. So they think it's far off, but they're trying to get there. Then they say the next four, these at the bottom, these are important to establish because if we don't get them right, we can't move forward. So it's important that we are in a place where we can all contribute, but we don't feel burdened. It's important that we're part of a team that works collaboratively and efficiently and in the best interests of the community. It's important that we're motivated and productive. It's important that we have a good work environment and good paying conditions. They didn't say they want to get rich. They just said good paying conditions. But we have to be aware of the things that will enhance or stymie us on that journey. These are the enablers. So it's important that we have a nurturing approach of respect and care. They don't want to be super competitive. They don't want to be stabbing each other in the back. They are stating it absolutely clearly. We want to be in a nurturing environment and we want to nurture others. Our local actions are part of a bigger picture and they're motivated by ethics and integrity. And then a very interesting one, we get this actually all over the world. People should be aware of the adverse effects of their speech or comments. So the interesting thing is you say, oh, you know, they're business workers, they're office workers, they don't represent the main community, but they are. They're members of North Norfolk. And we'll see in a moment, we'll see a bit more about the kind of settlement level, neighborhood level things. A lot of these characteristics are absolutely pervasive in the people in that area that we dealt with. So I'm not going to give you any more examples, but let's take a sneak peek at Singapore. Okay, so we've been dealing with the elderly. We haven't got the narrative, we haven't typed it up for you, but look at this. Okay, well, I've got you two so that you're kind of balanced, okay? And I'm not saying they're representative of all elderly of all Singapore, no. I'm saying they represent the hearts of two groups. So we're looking at Singapore. These are elderly, they're at least kind of over 65. I don't recall off the top of my head if these are groups that are over 80. So what's important to them? You can see the structure, right? So at the top we have 4 and it says, it's important to us that we have places to interact, places to go to interact. It's important that we can get the seniors to come out of the home and interact. It's important to have exercise opportunities and to have access to a nearby swimming pool because seniors can be injured easily with other exercises. And then an interesting point, it's important to us that amenities are offered on a first come, first served basis, not by community boundaries. And there was quite a feeling that, you know, we were brought up sharing all the time. Where's the sharing? And it wasn't just because they didn't have something they wanted. It was a very interesting comment. And I'm not saying it's true or not. That's not what I'm saying. This is what they said. Then if you go further down, we can look along the side. They're saying all these 3 things are present in everything they do. So let's see what those are. It's important that we don't change things unless it's really worth it for the better. So they don't like change. They take it easy on the change. It's important that everybody should be patient and considerate to others, okay, full stop, and then kind of, okay, especially seniors. But they want all society. It's important that we give support to those who need help. And a very interesting comment, male and female. Yeah, kind of an implication that sometimes we just think about the females. Well, actually the males might need help. Very interesting. So they say these are very carefully chosen words. They are not just rushed into being written down. And then we have kind of a cluster in the middle about A&E services shouldn't take you 12 hours. Family should stay in contact and keep a good understanding. Neighbors, we should have good neighbors and we should maintain a good relationship with them, which takes effort. So they're not saying, oh yeah, I want everyone to look after me. They're saying, okay, let's be clear about this. It's going to take some work. But they do think the elderly should always have someone looking out for them, but they don't know exactly who that should be. And they're kind of worried about it. And it's important that I can buy good local food nearby and cheap, and it should be cooked, so I don't have to cook, and that we have enough money for living. Okay, so that's one. Let me just, for comparison, here's another one. Look at see how the structure is different. It's completely bespoke. So they're saying these things at the top, oh, you're going to love these. I put them upside down. Let's start from the bottom then. It's important to us as a foundation at the bottom that we have fresh air, and we can, because that makes me feel good. What they mean by fresh is a good question. You have to, we didn't force them to say it more clearly. To them, it just was fresh. It's important that we can walk around safe. A lot of people are expressing their gratitude. It's not like they haven't got it and they want it, like living in the middle of London. No, they have it and they really, really appreciate that they can walk around safe all the time. It's important to have greenery in between the buildings. They love it. They just, it's something they often comment on. Then it's important to them that people think about each other more. It's important to them that social interactions for older adults are made easier. And you know, while we're at it, social interactions for everybody should be made easier. They're really finding social interactions tricky. They're really at the center here. How can we possibly bump into each other more? And they often talk about how they purposely come out of the apartment when they think the neighbor might be watering the plants so they can bump into them. They're trying to find ways to bump into people. They haven't got enough. And they're look at this, they're worried about the younger generations. It's important to us that the young generation should have strict training. They'll have a good life if they do. You don't forget about this. Don't forget about giving, make sure they want it. They shouldn't be going looking for the strict training, because otherwise, how can they have a good life? It's important to us that volunteer activities are provided and organizing for those that are much older in the old folks' home. It's important that we bring joy to people. It's important that we're checking on the elderly. And look at this at the very top. What is this kind of the top? It's important that singing and dancing are encouraged in society. It's important that I have a chance to perform and watch dancing. It's important that people sing to release stress. It's important to improve your health through singing. And it's important to improve your health through exercise. So there you are. Those are your sneak preview of the, I think it's a little bit different to what you might find, right? In a simple questionnaire, knock, knock, excuse me, I want to ask you about your life so I can work out how to help you from the heat. Now you would get very different answers. Okay. So we've looked at self-portraits. These are for all the ones I've shown you are kind of a portrait of a group. But if I do lots of groups, I should get a feel for the place. Of course, if I've got two incredibly different groups, I'll have to do it separately for them. But as long as they're a little bit similar, then it can be kind of settlement level. It could be neighborhood or town even. And this is actually an example for North Norfolk, which is an area in the UK where we were asked to look at investment for infrastructure. The government was saying, we keep investing in infrastructure, and then people turn around and say, oh, no, you've invested in the wrong thing. And we haven't got that much money, so if we're going to invest, we'd like them to tell us what we should be investing in. So could you find out? So we started the way we normally do. See all these different groups at the bottom? We take like 10, 20 groups, and we look at all the things they say, and we do some thematic analysis coding, and we end up with what here I'm going to put in green, the cultural shared values. So for North Norfolk, what we found was really big was community interactions were really important to them, right? And the chance to serve others and to nurture others it was a big thing. This is in the DNA of these people. And kindness and empathy, togetherness. A lot of these people were only working part-time or retired. It was a very, very heavily dominated population, dominated by seniors or semi-retired people. So, but a lot of the shared values were about community and thriving communities, okay? So bear that in mind. This is the green bit, right? And can you see where it came from? It came from 10 or 20 groups being synthesized, right? So these are now the cultural shared values of kind of neighborhood area. So now that's in the center. It's in the center here. And if you ask some questions about if something changed and would make you really want to leave North Norfolk, what would it be? And they give us some answers. And those are kind of red lines. You do this, I'm going to leave. One of them was access to the beach. Okay, these people are living near the coast. They've got fantastic sky views. They can see the sea. They're up on a cliff. But those cliffs are getting eroded more and more and more. Actually, the villages are falling into the ocean. They're having to, so the council's having to work on moving the entire village backwards, 10 miles, 20 miles, whatever it needs. These are some of the problems they're having that the government is thinking about infrastructure. And then we ask them, which kind of elements of this area you live attract you, would attract you to live here and stay here? And they tell us something. So we have one question, one question about attraction. And what you end up with is, in this box altogether, is what's called a desirable state. Now, desirable states is an idea that was discussed in urban planning some years ago, and it kind of went out of fashion because you couldn't define it. So if you have a city and something happens, like a section of it gets drops into the sea, or a part of it has a big explosion or contaminated land, you need to redo it. So it has to recover from a shock. If you talk about its resilience, it's going to go back to a new state, but it may not be the same as the old state. So the question is, which state is acceptable? And so if you could define a desirable state, it would be really easy, much easier to plug the models that are going to do their algorithmic thing and do a bit of calculations to come back and tell you what the new city state should be. The problem is you couldn't define the desirable state, but we have, because we believe we have. We got a paper on this. Because at the end of the day, if people won't live in the city, it's not going to be a city for very long. Okay. But the modelers tend to work on different levels, which I'll show you in a moment. And because people can't be measured, you see, you can't just hook them up and get a number. So it's not very sciencey. It's kind of too soft. It's a bit too subjective. Why don't we leave that and let's just work out how much electricity they use, what their income is, how many kids they got, how many square meters the houses are. That's much easier. Let's work on that stuff and put that into our model. And let's forget about what people want because we don't know. Well, now we have a method that can get it. You may not like what they want, but we do know what it is. And we can even tell you, if you do more of this, they'll come and the city might grow, the population might grow. And if you do more of these, they might leave. So this really could define a desirable state. Well, there's a lot of modelers who have been trying to work out how to integrate different subsystems. So you got modeling on materials and energy, subsystem within a city, and some really complex models on how much energy you need, under what conditions would it change, if there's a power outage here, how is it going to affect transportation, and so on. And you've got socioeconomic modeling, if the jobs aren't available or the housing doesn't meet the requirements where the jobs are, how is it going to affect things? So we got modelers who specialize on that. We've got gray infrastructure. So what roads do we need? What coastal protection do we need? Got modelers for those. And governance. How should we govern? How do the districts report to further up? And how do the districts interact with residential or neighborhood groups and so on? The trouble is you can't model all of them together. So modelers have been working more and more and more every year on how can we integrate these different levels, these different subsystems of urban planning. And it's really, really hard. They've managed to integrate a couple of them. But the trouble is when you say, finally, can you get all of them to map onto a final model of the city? And the answer is, well, no, it's too complicated. There's people there, the people, it's too complicated. And it is. Well, the way we've done it, we can actually say, what are these things about? What is it that's attracting them and sending them away? And these are color-coded to show you which layers of the modeling are important for different reasons. You can now go back to your model and start saying, okay, look at this. Basically, all the green, the governance, good governance, as judged by the people, attracts them. And bad gray infrastructure will make them go away very fast. You can start doing all sorts of thinking and interrogating of this, and you can do it at different levels and so on. And you can also start understanding how to put those models together. So I think we have a paper on that as well. Okay. That was just looking at the shared values. Now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What about some really specific questions? So we have a part two. Part two is the focus group discussions. So after we figured out what's important to the people, we say, oh, have a cup of tea now. And this goes really fast. You only need 20 minutes for this part. You say, let's talk to you about your heat problems, which we're doing in Singapore now. When it's hot, what do you do differently? Or what's your perspective of climate change? Do you know what climate change is? Do you think the government's prepared? Are you scared of it? Whatever, you can ask them, whatever the research question is. You now have something very interesting. You have people who, instead of you walking up to them with a clipboard saying, I've got 200 questions for you. Can you sit here while I go through them, please? I'll give you a voucher when you're done. Instead of that, they're sitting around. They've got really excited because they were sharing stuff with each other. They feel like what's important to them is all on the table and organized. And now you've got questions for them, and they just go bum, 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 bum. They just reach inside and say, yeah, I know the answer to that. I know how I feel about that. I can articulate my tacit knowledge on this subject, and they come out and just tell you all sorts of things very fast. So we get transcripts on these topics, and then we can go away and analyze them. So we have two types of data. We have the shared values, which is kind of the umbrella context under which you ask specific questions. And this here is the specific questions. This is the climate change. This is infrastructure needs. And in the middle, we already had this before, the desirable state, right? I already showed you that. But now what I do is I put the answers to my specific questions. So this was asking them, North Norfolk, what are your infrastructure needs? What do you think the government should be investing in? And the government was hoping, they really kind of expected people to say, oh, you really got to do something about the cliffs falling into the ocean and the roads, when the roads go, you're going to have to build new roads. And so all the engineers were lined up ready for the answers to say, oh yeah, we propose this road and this bridge and this coastal defense. And the answer was actually, public transportation and roads is only important if it's fragmenting villages or leaves people isolated. We don't really care about new roads. It's not top of our list. Because we first asked them what was important to them. And they said community interactions and thriving communities. This is what's important to them. So public transportation only was deemed important if it stopped us having community interactions, or it improved our cycling facilities, or it could support thriving communities. If you had public transport which was biased against poor people, it was too expensive so that the less well-off couldn't use it, we would be upset about that. We would want you to change that. If we couldn't get to the beaches, which are very important to us, at 6 in the morning, I want to get out there and feel the wind in my face, then yes, that would be a problem. But if there's not enough basic infrastructure so that people can't even get to work, assuming they have any work, or the housing is so bad that actually your house is 30 miles away from the nearest job, then things get to be a problem. So we now have a really interesting portrait of the importance of public transportation in the minds of these people. And the answer is it's not very important to them, unless you build that road right through my village, in which case I'm going to be really teed off. And do you know how hard it is to get my kid to school when you put a big main road through my village? I'm sick of it. Don't do it. Okay, so you can interrogate this. This becomes a conceptual map. And if you actually say, well, what was important to them? We have some interesting things over here. These were only the minor needs, the central needs, they said. In terms of infrastructure, well, you told us governance is an infrastructure. If governance is an infrastructure, that's the one that has a problem. Please, could the government invest in it? What we want is the government to remove party political damages. Every time we have different parties, they're fighting, nothing gets done. Could you fix that, please? Could you have your policies people-facing? You keep talking about big policies. At the end of the day, we don't see any difference in our village. So whatever you're doing in your talking is not happening. And local governance. Could we have more support locally? Government can't support national health at the moment. They're broke. They can't support subsidized busing. They're broke. Could you at least let us organize ourselves? Can you help us, give us platforms so that we can offer to give people lifts, so that we can support ourselves? Can we take care of the elderly ourselves? Can we do more? Don't get in the way. Can you provide a platform? So the net result of all this research was these people want improved local governance systems, not roads, not roads. Yeah, so this is a case where it was mostly funded by the Engineering Research Council, not Arts and Humanities. So it was a little bit tricky, but they did accept that this is actually what people said. And you can go a step further if you want and do some dynamic modeling and look at how important what kind of things are influencing prosperous communities, and how changes in the road is not a very important hub, and a really big one over here is thriving communities. We just started doing this kind of stuff. We can do it. We're not that interested. If anybody else out here would like to collaborate with us, take our data and do stuff with it, we're happy to hear from you. So overall, we've got this methodology where we have the workshop and transcriptions, and they feed into this conceptual map, and you can get this dynamic modeling. And some examples of different policy that we've used on in Botswana, we talked with village leaders about climate change adaptation and how they would change their village. In the UK, like I said, infrastructure needs. In India, Senegal, and Indonesia, we looked at the thematic cultural candidate factors for child stunting. In Nepal, we have profiled the whole village. It was very interesting. We're looking at how to use this as a new system for the S in ESG. ESG is being completely overhauled in Asia, trying to come up with a new one for Asia version, which takes into account concern for social, which is currently missing in the Western version of ESG. So looking at that. Nigeria, we looked at local land remediation. What did the people want from those projects? And some others there, perspectives of climate change. So we've actually made published contributions to many fields. You can imagine maybe my boss would be happy with me and we can publish so many papers, but actually my boss in both China and UK, not sure what to do with me, because, you know, an academic, you're only meant to be in one vertical area, not all the vertical areas. You shouldn't be publishing papers in lots of areas. You're supposed to be a vertical specialist. How can you possibly be a specialist? But wait a minute, the journals you're publishing in are quite good. So what's going on? Luckily, I don't need promotion anymore, so I'm not too scared. But I'm really worried for my crew because it's really not a healthy career situation. But you can see that I'm contributing to knowledge. But universities are not cut out for this. So now I want to just say to you, okay, I've shown you that it really is useful. This approach is useful, and it's a very different type of approach. I want to just quickly show you, I'm not going to dwell on it. I just want to show you there's a whole science behind this. And the science doesn't fit anywhere. Here we go. Ready? I'm going to make it quick. I'm not going to dwell. So do you remember we talked about the gap between knowledge types? So we have the academics here and society there. By finding a way to bridge this gap, I was able to contribute to lots of all these different places, right? So it looks like this. I did the red in the middle, and suddenly we got contributions going out both ends, all over the place. But this success has only been possible because I spent so much time in the middle trying to work out how to make it work. It was not a simple workshop. It took me 12 years to get that process working. So I showed you this. It looks like the underpinning science. It looks like a design-based interaction process, design process. So you could publish this in a design journal, maybe. But here we're talking about personal learning theory from Polanyi. This is a philosophy-based approach. Here we went further. We went lower down. We looked at, so here we have Polanyi's personal knowledge theory and the different micro steps. And when we analyze our transcripts and we can see evidence for these micro steps happening, it reveals the meaning making sequences. Meaning making and sense making is a concept used in business studies. So we can publish this in management learning, say, journals like that. Okay, we published this one in actually sustainability science. We published this paper. And then if we look at the groups, well, actually, you know, here's one series of meaning making cycles. And here we look at the different, here's 8 people, number 1 to 8 talking, and they're stimulating, we're following person number 9. And as they talk, they're triggering him to think and talk about something. And then the facilitator reflects it back and they think about something else and says something else. And then he triggers somebody else and it keeps going. And then suddenly at this point, he says, okay, I've actually made up my mind. I've changed my mind. I actually think this from now on. And this is a kind of transformative step. because he doesn't go back. He never goes back to what his first idea was. And then the other people have been deliberating also, and with his last reason, they also changed their mind. So this is an example in, I think, Botswana, where the whole group then changed their mind about something and they went on. And the next day they changed their policies. They sent information up to the district to say, we're going to do things differently in the village and so on. So we have evidence of transformative learning. And that's a whole area in itself. Transformative learning is mostly in kind of on the edge of education and on the other edge of business again, depending which methodology you use. Oh, but by the way, I don't think there's any field where you look at the interaction of an individual with a group in meaning making, except maybe psychoanalysis in a group. And we're not going to go there. We're not going to publish that. I've done enough. Yeah. So looking down the line, look what we've done. We've got these different levels. We've got the activity level, the thinking level, the meso level, the micro level, and we've just put a proposal in to look at the neuro level for brain measures, because this transformative effect actually changes how thinking is happening. And nowadays they can see how, they can tell with neuro measures, if a person learns to meditate, one part of the brain can continue to take over something and release another part of the brain. They can see these changes in neural pathways. So they were quite excited. We got several brain institutes at Fudan, and they were excited to try and look at this. So we're going to go down and look at that. So there is a new science. And for us to develop that science, for us to get the process right, took a lot of work, which doesn't show up anywhere in our academic merit system. And it's the kind of learning that takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. But young scientists, young academics are going to be racing to get one paper a year, one paper every 2 years, whatever. They've got the clock ticking. So it's really rare that a traditional university will make space for this. So if we just look at this, well, what sciences are nurtured as mainstream in universities? Well, definitely disciplinary. So architecture by itself, engineering by itself, brilliant. And since we're talking about vertical learning, we can easily tell who's got the most interesting, most recent development at the top of that vertical point. And there's some journals who will only publish the latest vertical learning. And if you publish in those journals, everyone knows you must be great. And then the whole university looks good. And then on a global scale, the university ranks highly. So everybody's really happy with that. So, oops, sorry, that was my mistake. You could have multidisciplinary, where several of them work together on a problem. So you need a new hip, development of a new hip replacement. So that's going to take some engineering, some medical people, some material sciences, but they're still staying in their own area, but they're working on hip replacements. You can have some participatory. So obviously you can't do much architecture or urban studies without talking to the public sometime. Even if you use the demographic data, you're going to have to talk to them. So we know about it. And the answer is, yes, go ahead and do it, but be very careful what you bring back with you into the papers, into your learning. Then, of course, we've got something new. Well, it's kind of moderately new, and that's interdisciplinary. And so if you take physicists and chemists, you might start getting chemical physics, and they might start making discoveries on the edge of the two disciplines. And that's been known for a while. So universities have been playing with allowing people from two different disciplines to work with each other for a long time. And it's really actively encouraged. Most universities really want to push it. And a lot of new knowledge has come out of doing that. It takes some time for academics to do this because it's a combination of fields. If it's a new combination, so environmental science and health. You look at environmental science and you get health experts and they can tell you exactly why certain chemicals in the atmosphere give you cancer in the lungs. So that might be new. They have to take some time to get to know it. But once it's known and the fundamentals are known, it's just standard and it's kind of nothing new. So all these outputs can be published, some in the health journals and some in the environmental science journals. So it's really easy and it works okay. But this last one, look at this. What if we're looking at an urban problem like NUS cities is? What if we have to work with city planners, city implementers, local governance systems, the green planners, the transport people, academic and the city, well, they use different kinds of knowledge. They think differently. They don't approach the problem from the same direction at all. And if you want all of them to work together, oh my goodness, that won't work very well unless they start to learn about each other's ways of thinking. But as you know, do you remember we showed already that this isn't really what it looks like? There's a big gap in the middle, which is where I've been working. Well, there's actually also a big gap here between the ways the academics work and the ways the non-academics work. There's a big gap. And so when you try and do something like this in NUS cities, it's a very special institute. It cannot be successful using typical traditional university ways of thinking or ways of working. You cannot reward the staff for only publishing in top journals of their discipline. You have to ask them to spend a lot of time working out on what's bridging the different types of knowledge, because these knowledge types are different. And there's room. What's exciting is that means there's entirely new sciences waiting to be developed, entirely new sciences on how to work out how to make recycling work, going across all the different sciences, how to design a city. But this takes considerable time. You're going to get very few papers in the beginning because it's such hard work to make it rigorous. And the outputs might be really impactful for society, but they might not initially be considered high quality science. It's usually done as case studies, one at a time. And all the academics doing those case studies haven't got time to build them into a whole new science. But if you don't build them into a whole new science, you're not giving anything to the generation behind you. They just have to do another case study. Okay? So you rarely build up a new system of knowledge. But guess what? AI can. AI is going to beat us. AI doesn't care about the discipline boundaries. You ask AI for a solution, they're just going to go and get whatever they want. They're just going to leapfrog over the humans. Because what are we doing? We're saying, oh no, I got to stay in my discipline. Sorry. AI is saying, don't recognize it. So we really got to think about the special circumstances it takes to develop this. And we really need to appreciate institutes like NUS cities, which have the space to do it. The beginning of the space to do it. Conclusions. Shared values crystallization. I'd like you to go away thinking that it is very useful by starting with people's shared values. And we do it through the local self-portraits, settlement level, and linkages to a specific topic. A new science is developing behind this approach. And the third point I just want to make is very few institutes, but NUS cities is one of them, can nurture these kind of new sciences. But they are necessary. They are necessary for solving new problems. But they need special academic conditions to thrive. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the inspiring lecture. I would now like to invite on stage the moderator of the evening, Dr. Olivia Jensen. Dr. Olivia Jensen is an economist and public policy scholar specializing in climate and water risks. She is currently the Deputy Director and Lead Scientist, Environment and Climate at the LRF Institute for the Public Understanding of Risks at NUS. She joined NUS in 2014 and was based at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy before moving to IPUR in 2019. Her research examines risk perceptions of individuals, experts, and decision makers, and explores how stakeholders communicate about risks and make decisions under uncertainty. She has experience in both academia and consultancy and has worked on projects for the World Bank, UN Secretary General's Office, Asian Development Bank, OECD, UNEP, Finance Initiative, and various government agencies, as well as investors and companies in the water sector. Please join me in welcoming her on stage. We now invite the audience on the auditorium as well as on Zoom to raise their questions.
Adults. Thank you. They're not too loud. Brilliant. I think we've got about 25 minutes for some questions. In a second, I'm going to work out how to tone myself down. So I'll just try to speak quietly for now. Thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful lecture. You used quite a few times in the course of it the words bridging, being a bridge. And it seems clear to me that an enormous value that your work brings is in bridging practitioners and academics, as well as in bridging academics from different domains and scholarly communities. So do you like to think of yourself as a bridge, or would you like to think of yourself as another type of urban infrastructure?
As another type of what?
Urban infrastructure.
Oh, interesting. No, I haven't specialized in urban stuff, so I don't think I can go there. A bridge, I would be very honored to be a bridge, I think, at any time. Is that still working? Yeah. I'd be honored to be called a bridge if I could do that. I'm not sure I do a fully good job at that. There is something called a boundary spanner already in, I'm not quite sure, I'm trying to think which literature they're used. A boundary spanner is somebody who understands conceptually at least what's going on in academic work, but has their feet in practice. And so they're considered to be able to span the two boundaries. I'm sure I've got a couple of my team from Fudan here, and they're more up to date with various literature. So a boundary spanner, yes, would be something, but I've met so many better boundary spanners. They usually are the people who work in the community, but they've been to university or something, but they're community workers or interpreters often are boundary spanners, and they do a much better job than me. So there we are.
A lot of your presentation is quite conceptual.
Okay.
So I don't feel bad. What kind of a concept is value? To what extent are our values unified versus relative to whatever topic or situation we're thinking about or context we're in? To what extent are they static versus dynamic? What are the thoughts about this, the concept of value?
So this is a wonderful place to immediately spot who comes from psychology or sociology or the what like. Psychologists love to think of the Schwartz value system, which has got a 10 that they claim go round in a circle and so on. But the Oxford Dictionary says it's simply one of the two interpretations is it's simply what is important to people. The word important in English is a very tricky word. We use words to pinpoint it better, which is meaningful, worthwhile, and valuable to you. So we're not interested really in frameworks of values and going back to perhaps, Aristotelian values or those in other fields. We simply ask the question, what's important to people in their lives, using the better words of valuable, meaningful, and worthwhile. So what's interesting is if you start there, you would imagine at first that there's an infinite number, and that wherever you go in the world, it's going to be completely different in one locality to another. And what we found is, just wonderful things, wonderful, interesting things come. Like we believe there might be about 700 or 800 things that are important to people, depending on what grammar you use. It actually depends on the linguistics and the way of expressing. And so then it becomes it's absolutely fascinating. It depends on the dimensions we have to express ourselves and the extent to which we're used to expressing ourselves. So there is a way, it is possible to do a unification or eventually build up a library which will show you the repeated patterns and how they cluster, although the clustering is dynamic. What's really interesting, I think, is to then say, well, if you have values down there, and we're convinced that grounded values are what we want to use, because then you're really allowing people to express them in their own frameworks. Then how are they related to universal values? Do we even have universal values? And we'd love to publish on this, but it's really hard to figure out where. So you can take something like the HDI, which is Human Development Index, and it had a series of indicators, and this is a fundamental enigma of measurement and universal versus local lists. So you can have a list of what something universal. Human development is about, for example, how many years you go to school before the age of 25 is taken as a universal measure of education. Okay, so if you've been to school for 10 years before you're 25, that's 10, that's good, that's high. Oh, you must be doing well on the HDI. But if you're part of a minority group in, say, New Zealand, and that means going to a colonial white school, that's actually a measure of oppression. And so you have a universal value being used to measure something which is offensive to people, to be used for that matter locally. So if we then say to them, okay, so, say you say to, the ladies in East Lombok, what would you consider a measurement of good education? They may say, well, it's clearly how many chapters of the Quran my child has memorized and whether or not they can be a merchant in the marketplace. That's a good education. So it's a very good question, what are values? But I believe they can be pinned down. They can be made codifiable. But you need somebody who's willing to look beyond the framework of their discipline and to accept that localized values, which is what sustainability is supposed to be about, sustainable development, localized values maybe should be weighted and understood more. But again, we need a whole new science to understand that. And we need to make space for this science to grow.
There were about dynamic versus static values. And you said if you go back to the same community 6 months later, they're good to go. They're still very much in the same value spaces when you left them.
Unless you've had a pandemic, yeah. Generally speaking, yeah. Okay.
There may just be a lifetime effect that a single individual, as they grow, their values change. And you can see that also perhaps at a community level as different external events or influences that affect that community.
So I'm very much led by what I find in the field. I'm an experimentalist, experimental physicist to begin with. And so in the field, we found that, yes, you go back and that same group will say to you, this is what our values are, and it's still important to us. And they will often say, at first they say, oh, we're going to put it on the wall and use it as our map. But actually they don't put it on the wall because they're so at home with it that they don't need to see it on the wall. It's really interesting. And you come back 6 months later and they say, yeah, that still represents us. But of course, we're talking about that group. So if somebody has left the group and somebody else has come in the group, it changes. And so I've learned from my experiences in the field that if we take a person in the morning and he's the leader of a research group and we're doing leaders of the research groups as a group, we get their sets of values. Then I go and follow this guy to his own research group or to a village where he's working, for example. That same person in another group, that group will come up with their shared values and they may be different. But if I could follow him around, and we've wanted to do this, we've never had the funding to do this. If I could follow different people around, most people only have 5 or 6 groups at any given time that they really interact with. If you followed one of them around, I think you'd find that his values would be evident in all the groups, but in different positions of priority. So I can be a father and have values of a father. And then I go to work and I'm the most junior person in the team and I have different values. And so the context, and that's why we have to do a contextualization stage. The context gives the boundary in which values become manifest, is how I would say it as an experimentalist. And I didn't realize that sociologists knew this all the time because I came from physics. My first subject is physics. And suddenly somebody's telling me, oh, that's common sense in sociology. We knew that all the time. But that's not what the psychologists say. They tend to think that a person has well, they did for a while say that they would be in a certain order, and now they're beginning to talk a little bit more about values moving depending on the context. I don't think they move around a lot. I think it's just the context brings out different values in use. Yeah.
I up to the audience. Anybody's got a question? And do introduce yourself.
Come on, we got to have more questions than this. Get your money's worth.
Hi, My name is Joshua Vargas. I'm Program Coordinator of Future Cities Laboratory Global. So that's another urban science institute in Singapore, along with NUS Cities. And it's a very interdisciplinary field. So as you've seen with NUS Cities as well, we're trying to figure out how to organize research teams. And in our case, we have different modules of people from different disciplines tackling the same team. So extending to that, I'm really curious about this new science that you're trying to describe. And I'm wondering, if you could design a university, or just not even a university, just an organization or a group of people who want to tackle different issues, how would you organize it if you want to go outside of disciplines? Would we even need faculties at all? Would we need departments?
I think 2 weeks ago, so when I came, and certainly after watching some of your students giving presentations, I've been thinking about this, and I don't know the answer, because I wouldn't start from a university. So if you don't start from a university, what does that mean? Then it's a big question. I wouldn't start with HDB either. So I think it's a really interesting question. It always intrigued me that, is it Philip, Prince Philip educated his son Alexander, who became Alexander the Great, and he was extremely careful about who he hired to teach him, which didn't turn out to be, somebody can tell me who it was. It was one of the great philosophers, Aristotle, yeah. I thought, wow, what a great teacher. What a great father to think that the most important thing I must do is get the best teacher for my son. And so I thought, if you only have time to teach a kid 10 things, what 10 things would you teach them? And I think the first thing, the absolutely number one, is critical thinking. Throw away the disciplines. Don't throw them away completely, because, you know, they spend a lot of time developing methodologies which might be useful, or systems of knowledge, but keep the things that can stand on their own. And when you've got sciences where, so-called sciences, where they say, oh, we do this because we believe it's the right way to do it, but they can't justify it with respect to any other subject. They're floating subjects. Throw them away, and just be a critical thinker. But I think good designers, I love what they do, but I haven't seen, maybe I'm ignorant, and that's probably the case. I haven't seen a rigorous way of teaching design, or encapsulating design, or summarizing design. And so I think that's probably where I'd start, is understanding what's already going on and how can we systematize it. But it's going to start with teaching students to critically think for themselves and build. And how do you build ideas solidly on top of each other so that you can go vertically? Because we've got great design, great urban studies stuff, but I don't know how much it's building.
Thank you.
I'm Christopher Gee from the Institute of Policy Studies. And really to build on the last question, and posit something, you know, and really say maybe the site of this new learning might be where we collect knowledge, right? So all the different groups that you interact with, right? Where are we storing that knowledge that you built up about the shared values, right? And if we can then start to integrate all of that learning about those shared values across the groups, might that not start the next, or might that not be the site of the next university?
So you mean if I could somehow find a way to transfer the knowledge I collect from these groups across which groups? The academic groups or the other groups? The ones I've done the workshops with. I don't know that they're interested in other groups. They have their own lives. They're worrying about surviving in East Lombok. I don't know that they have time to think about what the people in Senegal or Indonesia were saying.
What about the policymakers?
Oh yeah, yeah, and I have done that. We've been involved. Usually, we can't get the funding to do this non-existent science unless we sell it on behalf of an application. So usually, I have to write reports for policymakers. So the policymakers are quite impatient. When I say to them, please read the profile because you're going to learn so much. It's like I asked them later, and they didn't even get past line 3. And the trouble is that if you try to summarize this rich, thick data, so-called thick data, you end up with truisms like, you know, the elderly want to interact. Yeah, we knew that. You know, you could take out the themes and write them on the back of an envelope, but when you hear them saying, you know, I try to find out when my neighbor's watering her plants so I can bump into them, it brings something home. It really brings it home. And when you see how they relatively organize shared values, it tells you a lot. So what we're starting to look at is AI. How can we train AI to effectively represent groups? So if you say to AI, when people say this, they actually mean this. They act like this according to their own portraits, they mean this. This stands like in relation to this concept in this manner. It's actually easier. It might be easier to do that. We're beginning to think about that. And of course, now in agent-based modeling, you're getting to the state where you might have some AI impersonating different points of view, and then you ask the different AIs to interact with each other on a problem. And to be honest, this might be easier than getting a policymaker to read our data or to read our results.
Yeah,
Oh God, sorry. I don't like the mic near me. Okay, so is it actually a new science or is it just blending boundaries? I mean, I don't quite understand how it's a new science rather than a method of blending disciplines together or merging disciplines together in order to move forward. And then when you blend boundaries, right, and you create a new education system or sort of method of learning, doesn't it naturally categorize itself anyway?
Wouldn't it naturally what, sorry?
Categorize. Like
categorize itself.
Is it because wasn't that how science kind of started, where it wasn't really a pure set of disciplines of physics, maths, and things. It kind of just started out from philosophy, astronomy, and sort of built up to its own separate disciplines. So the moment you say a new science, right, does it actually mean new science? Or is it just blending the boundaries to create a whole set of new disciplines, but you've already just done like a counterproductive thing where, and you said you wanted to fight vertical systems, but then, well, I wouldn't say fight vertical systems, but you said you sort of wanted to encourage interdisciplinary, but the moment you blur it, people will start to categorize it again, right?
Okay, so my first subject was physics, and you could argue that all material science came out of physics, and now they call it something different. The physicists just say it's physics. So I mean, all of computing, you know, came out of physics. So it's just an extension of it. I get your point. I get your point. I don't mean my talk tonight to be that I'm waving a flag for a particular new science or something else. I was actually emphasizing that because I'm a guest of NUS Cities, and I would really like the audience to appreciate how special it is for a university to make room, and to be frank, how vulnerable an institute like NUS Cities is. Because around the world, different universities have experimented with transdisciplinary institutes. And the problem is that they usually have to have contributions from the different disciplines. And very quickly, the discipline budget holder says, wait a minute, you're not really in the center of my discipline. I don't fancy giving you this money this year. And they go out. And so it's only really great universities like, say, MIT, which I didn't mean to say MIT is very great, but in this term, in terms of having living labs and learning from the day-to-day interaction of academics with society, they really try to do it. So I didn't mean to overemphasize that it's a new science and I'm waving a flag for new science. What I was trying to say is what we've done here, that my team different teams over 15 years doesn't fit anywhere in existing academia. And it doesn't even start, we don't even know where it's going to go until you dig deeper. But what we held at the center was, how can we get a valid representation of these people who are not articulating and haven't finished making meaning of the thing we want to get out of them? They haven't even made meaning out of it. And so it's living in a space which is really undervalued and underinvestigated, which is tacit space. And tacit knowledge is assumed to be something fluffy. And at the moment, globally, the human race is disdainful of information, which is not objective and can't be measured with an instrument. And yet, our biggest problems in the globe, or globally, are exactly problems which overlap with these dimensions. And it's the very fact that we're ignoring those dimensions and thinking we can never get to them, that we're ignoring them, that's causing us to produce lots of technology, which is not really hitting home at where it's needed. So again, I didn't mean to emphasize that it's a new science, but it is, because you say you're just merging boundaries. You can merge boundaries as much as you like. You can have a monkey trying to type out Shakespeare. But the reality is we didn't say, oh, I think we'll pop over to philosophy and grab this and grab something over here in management science and pull them together and develop a new science. It didn't work out that way. It was, we want to find a valid way of representing tacit knowledge of people who are not even articulate, but have not, or it's not even those. We want to find a way of representing tacit knowledge that people will later say is authentic. That was our center. And how do we do this with validity? And what we had to do then was develop things which we later found have connections with other theories. So it was starting from the center, moving out, and then finding we could connect with established theories. Yeah. And we're still working at it, because there's a lot of things we do that we haven't codified yet. So we do it intuitively in the workshops, we do it intuitively in our analysis, and I want it codified. I don't want it to be made into a system so it can be taught to other people. And as we systematize everything, we will understand better the underlying rules which govern it. I don't know if I answered your question. Okay. I'm available afterwards for a discussion. Yeah, sure.
I think we've got time for one more question. Yeah.
Hi, so I'm a philosophy, politics, and economics undergraduate. And I know that during the sharing, you talked about how some of the limitations of this area of development is that it's very time consuming and that it doesn't belong under any specific domain. And so I wanted to know, beyond these, I guess, logistical barriers, whether or not there were any, let's say, theoretical limitations to your method.
Sorry, I couldn't quite catch the end of it. Tell me again the last sentence.
So I wanted to know more about beyond the logistical sort of limitations to this development of study, whether or not there were any theoretical limitations. So in terms of which areas or along those lines of where your development of studies can apply to, I guess.
Ooh, well, you saw the kind of scatter diagram of where we're publishing, right? So I must admit, after 12 or 15 years, I'm really glad I've got one or two team members who've been with me, long enough that they can take over, because I am not ready to write a paper or a proposal in another discipline again. Luckily, an assistant was able to do the neuroscience proposal, because I just didn't feel like, but AI can do that nowadays, right? I can say, tell me what's going on, maybe. So I'm not going to write the AI proposal. So it's already in lots of disciplines. I mean, I think I can turn it around. Let me turn it around to you and say, how many examples can you think of where different academic subjects are reporting problems because which you could now reinterpret now that you know there's such a thing as a knowledge gap and there's such a thing as tacit knowledge needing a need for a translation process. Now that you know that might be true, how many situations can you spot when you're reading around the literature where this could be a problem and it could be spanned, it could be bridged, and it's just everywhere. It's just everywhere. So it could be in teachers understanding children. It can be in autistic people learning to interact with other people. It can be policymakers with scientists, because there's a knowledge gap and we're not accepting that. You have to take an extra step. We've done a lovely project on conflict resolution. We took Asian teachers and Western teachers in the same school who didn't talk to each other at all. We had them go through this, put up what's important to them, then explain it to each other. And then on the 3 or 4 really difficult sticking points, sit down and write it out and give it to everybody and stuff. And then we put them together. Next day, they're out there doing projects together by themselves, So I think it's more a matter of what would it not influence. Sorry. Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, what's interesting this is about taking the time to develop a new science, okay? Because every time you find, oh, it didn't work that time. Why didn't it work? That's how we were able to figure out how it does work. So we started off with the design-based activities. So lots of designers walk in, consultants walk in and say, oh, let me do mission and vision strategy for you. And they say, here's some photos and have fun with this idea and discuss this amongst yourselves. And at the end of the day, you write something out and the next day you forget about it because it wasn't useful. And so just for example, if somebody walks into the workshop 20 minutes late, it doesn't work. If somebody has a translator sitting next to them, it doesn't work. So we have lots of understanding about when it won't work. And each time it tells us why it can work. So the translator is causing the meaning making to happen in a different language to the rest, and you can't integrate them because the meaning making has to. So we then did all our preparations. We always do the workshops in the local language. You can't ask someone to make meaning in a different language. It doesn't work very well. So every time we learn more and more about lots of things, but usually it just points us to how we could be writing papers in other subjects. And I'm getting a bit tired. I need a bigger team. I'm going to do a small advert. I do work at Fudan University, which is a host to Chinese government scholarships. I can nominate people for international scholarships that pay for your tuition for 3 or 4 years, and you get an allowance and you get housing. You need to contact me in advance so we can talk about things. We have 2 postdoc positions coming up. Yeah, but only hard workers and flexible thinkers are welcome. Yeah.
I think we have to wind up there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. You said that only great universities are able to have transdisciplinary institutes like NUS City. So I think everybody from NUS can take that as a lovely compliment.
Yeah.
But more importantly, we've been just very lucky indeed to have you here. And
thank you very much.
Your time and your thoughtfulness.
Oh, it's been a real privilege, really.
And that effort of translating for us this long, careful, and inspiring work you do has been hugely appreciated.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for participating in this lecture. We would also like to thank Prof. Marie for giving us her valuable time to share the thoughts, visions, and ideas. We would also like to thank Dr. Olivia for her time as well as her moderation for the session. I'm sure we all have learned a lot from this lecture. Thank you everyone for attending this event and actively participating with your questions. Please watch out our social media channels as well as your emails, where we will be informing you about our future lectures. Thank you and good night.